Hey, Dr. Mitch Earlywine here with some tips and tricks for enhanced academic performance. Any course with me or any course online, really any course you take is going to benefit from some of these habits, skills, and abilities. So let's take a look. First and foremost, we're going to talk about Cornell Notes. I'm going to emphasize the need for brief, regular study sessions and how they're markedly better than massed practice where you're trying to do 7 hours instead of 1 hour. Frequent testing, so making sure that you generate recognition and recall, make sure you come up with answers to questions rather than just recognize stuff. Some good self-care, making sure you're in good physical and mental shape so you can learn as efficiently as possible. And finally, some class-specific tips for my course, APSY 389, Addictive and Compulsive Behaviors. They'll apply to my course only, but might be some intriguing ideas nonetheless. So first and foremost, let's talk about Cornell Notes. This is how someone with obsessive compulsive disorder would lay out Cornell Notes. But the take-home message is still very much the same. I would recommend taking these old school on paper. I know it's not particularly eco-friendly, but it gets you involved in a way that's going to help you remember. You'll notice that there's some space on the left-hand side and plenty of space on the bottom. So you want to put the main ideas in your own words. You want to summarize and most importantly, write some questions for yourself on the bottom as you take notes. If you need 100 pages for this course and any other one, it really is okay. We can always recycle. So let's get into the details on this. Yes, definitely leave yourself plenty of space on the left-hand side and on the bottom, just so you've got room for your own thoughts and for putting things in your own words, and so that your pages don't get so cluttered they become overwhelming. You really want to make sure you finish each one with a question that you can see if you can answer later on. Put the main ideas in your own words. This is really all about depth of processing. So it's one thing to just be a stenographer and get every word, but that's not really what's important. See if you can get an idea, a new term, a new concept, the way a model works, and get that so that you can say it to someone else. Connects to something you already know. Ideally, the information is going to be related to some information you had in another class or in the same class previously. Try to see if you can fit it in to something where you already have a connection. Use mnemonic devices. So if you have to make up acronyms, if you have to come up with wild images, that's actually great because it's going to help you remember. The French word for grapefruit apparently is pamplemousse, and it's imagine an image of a moose with these big pimples that are really grapefruits. How could you forget that? And finally, write questions at the bottom. So even if it's just as simple as, what are these contributors, or what are the things in this category? Something that'll make you have to answer a question rather than just recognize a summary, because that's going to get your memory working. So brief, regular study sessions, I really want to emphasize, yes, 7 hours in one night is horrible compared to 1 hour in 7 nights. Really need that space for memory to consolidate, and it's just good for your mood. Nobody wants to sit down to 11 hours of studying all in one day. It's more than any human can handle. Data-based recommendations, if you can get roughly 25 minutes on a lecture or on reading, making sure you're taking notes throughout, and then give yourself a 5-minute break. Watch some comedy, listen to some music, walk around a bit, and then bring yourself right back. We don't want it to turn into a 25-minute break. And then make sure you schedule some time later that same day before you hit the hay for a 10-minute review. So walk through the notes and make sure you can answer the questions that you wrote at the bottom. You'll be glad you did. The case for frequent testing has a ton of empirical support. If you see Rodinger's work, basically, if you have to answer questions about the topic and you have to do so frequently, when the exam comes, you're going to be delighted. So make sure you not only recognize it when you see it, but you have to recall it. You can explain it to someone else without any cues. That's going to really drive things home. Recognition memory is much more sensitive than recall, so you can get yourself lulled into this false sense of security. Oh, I know this, because you recognize it when you see it, And then when you don't have it in front of you, it's a cold, hard day. So make sure you can generate answers yourself. An active review beats a passive review, and truth be told, activity is better than passivity, particularly in education. A few tips on self-care that I want to drive home. Make sure you've scheduled time. If you've got too much on your plate, maybe this isn't the class for you, or it's not the time to take this course, or you need to wait for a different semester to come back to school, that's really okay. Better to do that. Make sure you schedule time for when you're clearly not working. This, oh, I'm half studying, but I'm on the phone and I'm listening to music all at once isn't very helpful. You should have time when you're clearly off and having fun or relaxing, and you should have time when you're really focusing and doing studying and nothing else. The data on sleep are pretty compelling, as you might guess. Sleep-deprived people do not learn well, and you almost all have a chronic sleep deficit. It's just part of living in the United States. If this year is like any other year, odds are high all of you have a pretty chronic, at least 15 minutes a night sleep deficit. If you'd sit down and just do the pros and cons of going to bed 15 minutes early, I think you'll be glad you did. Trust me, it's Thursday night and you're out at the clubs. Odds are high you're not going home with anybody tonight. Go ahead and hit the hay. You'll study better in the morning. The diet data, the obesogenic diet, the heavy fat, heavy sugar, lots of animal products is a good way to feel really awful when you try to study and to not necessarily learn well. The animal data are quite compelling, the human data a little less so, but it certainly makes sense. Make sure you eat, get enough calories, but don't overeat, and then make sure you're getting your micronutrients and good food. Eat some leafy greens anytime you get a chance. Finally, assistance, make sure you ask for assistance. Email me, email the TA for getting behind. Don't wait until you're 6 weeks behind. Make sure you understand stuff as the class is going on, and then don't hesitate to reach out to the Psychological Services Center off campus or the Counseling Center. And hey, you've already paid for that. You might as well go. Psychotherapy is a wonderful thing. Trust me, I've been doing it for years. Finally, some class-specific recommendations. Really, I just want to draw distinctions between what's important and what's not. So you're going to know a fact or a topic is important because I'm going to repeat it. When I'm perseverating on it, it's obvious that I must think it's important. I doubt I'm the only professor like this. For individual drugs, I'm often curious about what was the first identification in a plant or the earliest synthesis or extraction. There's often some guy's name involved. It's almost always a white guy, but not every single time, thank goodness. Learn the acute effects, so what happens pretty much right after you take a drug. Make sure you understand the chronic effects, that is, what happens when you take it long term. These aren't always pleasant or good, but definitely good to know. And then finally, identify the neurotransmitter. Obviously, most drugs are dirty. They affect multiple neurotransmitter systems, but there's sort of one dominating neurotransmitter system that we're going to emphasize in the course. You'll know what it is. Finally, let's make sure you understand what's not important. Highlighting, the last review came out a couple of years ago, and highlighting is basically a waste of time and markers. You're really not going to learn anything just by rubbing that yellow across all the text. Give those to your kids and have a good time with them. The exact numbers of users, so I know folks get lost in, how many 8th graders smoked tobacco in 2015. That's just a poor use of your time. If you know that caffeine is a widely used drug and salvia divinorum is not, you've got the big idea. The exact dates of innovation. So I love that you know exact dates for individual drugs, 2737 BC for cannabis or things along those lines. That's great, but we don't need to know every single invention of every single drug in a category. The fact that Librium was started in 1963 is not something you need in your noggin. And then every single mechanism of action and all their details, save that for a psychopharmacology class. You'll definitely like it. It's interesting stuff. Some of the debates about salvia's mechanism or which neurotransmitter is most important is always really fun, but we're not going to play that up in this course. Finally, let me just emphasize, hey, we can do this. So it's got some advantages to actually have an online course. You're going to be able to listen to these multiple times. You can take notes repeatedly. You can still have access to me and the TA, but not have to be in a specific spot at a specific time. It's really potentially wonderful. Stay strong, take good care of yourself, exercise, get some time out with your buddies, make sure you see the sun, and let's all hang out together. Intervene early, please, please, please. Go ahead and make sure you reach out to me or somebody else if things are starting to get troublesome. And finally, let's savor the joys. Let's make sure we really get the chance to relish anything that I say that you enjoy. Let me know. Anything that you do that I enjoy, I'll let you know. Obviously, we got to make the most of a crazy time. Any moment that you happen to relish is worth repeating and letting other folks know about it. Hey, thanks so much for being on this ride.